Of all the dreams of human beings, few are as yearned for as that of flying. The chimerical intention of taking your feet off the ground and flying away came from the times of Icarus. On December 17, 1903, at a place known as Kill Devil Hills, two brothers turned their chimerical intention into a reality. Wilbur and Orville Wright, commonly known as the Wright Brothers, were American inventors and aviation pioneers. Wilbur Wright was born on April 16, 1867 in Millville, Indiana, and Orville Wright was born on August 19, 1871 in Dayton, Ohio. They were two of 7 children born to Milton Wright, a clergyman. The brothers grew up in Indiana and Ohio, moving several times during their childhood. Both attended high school, but neither one graduated. Despite having less than minimal academic experience, Wilbur and Orville Wright nonetheless were on their way to make their mark in history. In 1889, Wilbur, along with his brother Orville, designed and built their own printing press and launched their first business venture, a weekly paper publication called the West Side News, with Orville as the publisher and Wilbur as the editor. In 1890, for a short period, they converted the paper to a daily publication called the Evening Item. They then focused on commercial printing. In 1892, during the national bicycle craze, the brothers opened a bicycle shop called the Wright Cycle Exchange to sell, repair, and rent this new method of transportation. Given the fact that Orville was a champion cyclist, in 1896, they even began to design and build their own bicycles, changing their business name to the Wright Cycle Company. By this time, several people were experimenting with flying contraptions. German aviator Otto Lilienthal successfully flew gliders and was the first in doing so. However, in 1896, Lilienthal died when one of his gliders crashed, killing him. That same year, an American called Samuel Langley succeeded in making short flights with an unmanned aircraft, powered by a small steam engine, known today as a drone. These events inspired the brothers. Their business also allowed them to finance their newly discovered passion, to which they began to dedicate themselves systematically from 1899. The Wright brothers started their research on Lilienthal's flights, who for many years had created countless gliders and established the fundamental principles of planned flight. They also researched and studied Langley's developments and principles of aerodynamics and the process by which air can support wings. Starting from these contributions, in 1900, Wilbur and Orville Wright launched into the construction and testing of kites and biplane gliders at a place called Kitty Hawk, North Carolina. Many early tests of the glider were made while the glider was tethered by ropes like a kite with no one on board. The glider did not perform as expected, so the brothers returned to Ohio. In 1901, the brothers traveled again to Kitty Hawk to test a modified glider. Although they made their longest flight of 400 feet, the glider was still not performing well. To test their developments, they built their own wind tunnel back in Ohio that same year, in which they could test the aerodynamic characteristics of different types of wings. In 1902, they returned to Kitty Hawk to test another modified glider, this time with the introduction of elements such as the vertical rudder, the horizontal elevator, and the ailerons. Their work and the incorporation of these improvements soon allowed them to fully control the movement of the device in the 3 directions necessary for flight, thus paving the way for a more ambitious project: build a powered aircraft. In 1903, the brothers built an aircraft they called the Wright Flyer, complete with propellers and a 12-horsepower gasoline engine. On December 17, 1903, in the plains of Kill Devil Hills near Kitty Hawk in North Carolina, before the eyes of only 5 witnesses and decided by a coin toss, Wilbur Wright, piloting the Wright Flyer, took off in flight, traveling about 120 feet for 12 seconds and 10 feet off the ground. The brothers made history by flying the first controlled sustained flight of a powered heavier-than-air aircraft, changing the world of aviation forever. In 1904, the Wright brothers followed by building a more evolved aircraft model called the Wright Flyer II, with a weight of 780 pounds and equipped it with a 4-cylinder engine, capable of developing 21 horsepower. Wanting to cut on expenses, they chose a place for testing near their hometown of Dayton, Ohio, on a private airfield known as Huffman Prairie. Their feats went almost unnoticed at a time when man's attempt to fly in a heavier-than-air aircraft went unrecognized after the successive failures of Samuel Langley, who had invested $50,000 in government funds between 1897 and 1903 on his projects. Most were skeptic that the brothers had achieved something worth writing. Many at the time did not believe it. By trial and error, after many injuries and rebuilding damaged aircraft, on August 13, 1904, making an unassisted takeoff, Wilbur Wright exceeded his first flight at Kitty Hawk, flying 1,300 feet. Later, they built a weight-powered catapult to assist them on takeoffs. On September of the same year, Wilbur completed the first circle in history by a manned heavier-than-air powered aircraft, covering 4,080 feet in about 1.5 minutes. Wilbur and Orville each achieved their best flights yet on November 9th and December 1st. Each flight exceeded 5 minutes and covered nearly 5 miles in almost 4 complete circles. By the end of 1904, the Wright brothers had accumulated about 50 minutes in the air in 105 flights at Huffman Prairie. In 1906, the brothers designed the 3-axis control system that safely steered aircrafts, acquiring a U.S. patent number 821393 for a flying machine. In 1908, the Wright brothers began to make public demonstrations in Washington, D.C. and Europe, making them instantly world famous. The brothers began to build and sell airplanes, thus founding the Wright Company in November 22, 1909, in Dayton, Ohio, with Wilbur as president and Orville as the vice president. They sold airplanes to the U.S. Army, created a flying school, and made the first air cargo delivery in history. Wilbur Wright died in 1912 of typhoid fever at age 45. Orville succeeded to the presidency of the Wright Company and won the prestigious Collier Trophy in 1914 for his automatic stabilizer used on the brothers' Wright Model E-plane. Orville Wright sold the company in 1915, making the Wright Company part of the Wright-Martin in 1916. After many accomplishments, Orville Wright died on January 30th, 1948. He was 76 years old. The legacy of the Wright brothers continues. Their resilience in pushing the boundaries in an aviation world that was not conquered yet are still noticeable in every pilot and aircraft build today.